So we've been in this series called The Me I Want to Be. That we all have the best version of ourselves that we would want to become. And we all probably realize that we have some gap between where we are now and where we would like to be as a person. You know, maybe the gap is little for you, maybe it's big, I don't know. But we said that finding the path to emotional health is one of the ways to really become the me that we want to be, that all of us have emotions, and emotions are these windows into our soul. And if we're really going to become the full best version of ourselves, we need to pay attention to our emotions, because our emotions are telling us something. And so we've been on this journey, and for the last 5 weeks, these are the things we've talked about. We saw that to be emotionally healthy, we need to have self-awareness and practice silence and solitude. We looked at how our identity is rooted in the gospel, that we are more broken and flawed than we ever dare believe, but we are more loved and accepted than we ever dared hope. That this is our identity, that we are loved by God. That's the gospel, and that's what gives us our identity. Week 3, we saw that we need to break the power of the past, how much our family of origin has power over our todays and our futures, and how we need to kind of go back, look at some of those issues, expose those to God and the power of the gospel so that we can really live free from that power. Week 4, we talked about moving from control to surrender. We're all a bunch of control freaks, right? And we can't be fully emotionally healthy as long as we're trying to control our circumstances, control God, control one another. That as we move to surrender, we move to a place of freedom and emotional health. And then last week, Pastor Lisa led us through the gift of limits, and how we all have limits in our lives, financial limits and health limits and physical limits and time limits. But as we learn to embrace those limits, it's actually a gift to our lives, freedom to say no to certain things in our lives that bring emotional health. If you have been, I said at the beginning of the series, I guarantee, money back guarantee, if you stick with us through the series, you will be emotionally healthy at the end of the series. And so if you've been here for all 5 of these weeks, you are about, I would say, 62.5% emotionally healthy. And by the end of today, we're going to get you to 75%. Good thing is, if you've missed any of these are all on our website in video and audio format. Go back and check out the weeks that you might have missed, because that may be the one week that you needed to hear that was the thing that, wow, that's what I need that to move forward in my own emotional health, to be the me I want to be. But today, here's where we're going. Today, we're moving to enlarging our souls through grief and loss. Let me explain what I mean by that. When most of us think about grieving, we typically think about the sadness that comes, the grief that comes when we lose someone to death, someone that's close to us. And certainly that is a part of grieving. When we lose someone who's close to us, they die, we grieve. But grieving is so much more than that, because our whole lives is an experience of loss. From the moment we come into this world to the moment we leave, it is an experience of loss. Think about it. When you came out of the womb, you immediately experienced loss, right? You are exposed to the bright light and the cold air and this foreign environment. You're like, ah! Right? You want to go back where you came from, where it was warm and dark and comfortable, and you knew it. So right from the very moment you come into the world, you're experiencing loss. And the last breath you breathe at the end of your life, you will then lose everything at that very moment. And everything in between, from birth to death, is a series of losses. You know, you move to a new city and you lose your friends and the familiar. Or you have this dream to start a business, and you put everything you have and everything you are into this business, and it never gets off of the ground. And so you lose that life dream. Or you want to hold on to youth as long as you possibly can, but all the creams and all the lotions and even plastic surgery can't stop the aging process forever, and we lose as we age. But you see, there's a silver lining to loss and to grieving. And it's this: when we learn to grieve well, when we learn to process our losses well, it enlarges our soul. It does something in us when we come to terms with our losses, when we process through them, when we grieve them, that leads to an emotional and a spiritual wholeness. It leads to a freedom in life to fully engage, because we're able to let go of so many of the things that hold us back, like fear of loss. There is a silver lining to learning to process grief and loss. And really, this is so important to our emotional and to our spiritual development, that the Bible is full of stories of loss and grief. I mean, from Genesis to Revelation, it's all in there. You think about the longest book, the longest book in the Bible is are the Psalms, right? And the Psalms are these collection of poetry and songs that people are writing typically as a form of worship, and they would sing these in worship, and they would sing them to God. And you know that well over half, some say 2/3 of all of the Psalms are laments. They are this crying out in sadness and grief and confusion to God because maybe he seems absent or because of circumstances in our lives. But they would sing these in worship, and people would cry through these songs because we all experience loss. Outside of the Psalms, we see loss everywhere. King David, after Jonathan and his good friend Jonathan and King Saul died, he was so moved by grief, and he entered into that grief, he processed it. He wrote this long, long song. Maybe the longest song in the Bible. And not only did he sing it, but he taught it to his entire army. And they all processed grief together as they sang the song of lament over and over again for loss. Loss is everywhere in the Bible and processing loss. Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. All through the book of Jeremiah, he is lamenting over what is being lost for the people of God in the city of Jerusalem. He wrote a whole book of the Bible called Lamentations, which basically means crying, right? Ezekiel lamented. Daniel lamented. All the prophets lamented. Jesus cries at the tomb of Lazarus. He weeps over the city of Jerusalem. I mean, all through the Bible, we have this processing of loss until you get to the very end of the book, the very end of Revelation, where God says, and then he will wipe away every tear from their eyes, right? So finally, grief will come to an end, but not until we're in heaven. But as long as we're on this planet, loss is a part of life. We need to learn to process it. Grief is a part of the Bible. It's part of our spiritual development. But if we're honest with ourselves, we all know processing loss is not something we're good at in our culture, right? In our American culture, in our Christian culture in America, processing loss is not something we do well. It doesn't fit with our worldview, right? For us, everything is supposed to be always going up and to the right. Everything's getting better. Everything is getting bigger, right? New wins, new successes, new territory gained. We don't lose, right? We win. And so we don't know how to process loss well. When loss comes along, we want to cover it up. We want to ignore it. Maybe if we don't talk about it, nobody will notice. You know, we see it as a distraction. Maybe we see grief as weakness. At the very least, we see it as unproductive. Loss is something to smile through, skim over, cover up. I could speak from personal experience that I have learned about myself that grieving loss does not come naturally for me. My personality is one that just looks forward. I'm always looking for what's next. I don't typically look back very much. And so when bad things happen or if I experience loss, my tendency is just to keep going, keep looking forward. What's next? What's coming next? Now, that's done. That didn't work. That failed. You know, let's make what's coming next work better, right? Let's just focus on that. Or even when loss is experienced in the process of success, it's very hard to stop and celebrate and grieve what's being lost. When Kim and I first came to pastor here in this area, the year was 2000, a little over 16 years ago, we were pastoring in Franktown. One of the first things that we did was we established a small group of leaders. And the idea was we were going to call these small group the small group together to experience the power of shared life, that we were going to build this deep community because we didn't have small groups at Newday at the time. This was the birth of our small group system that we still have today. Some of the people in that very first small group are right here in this room. So we pull these people together and we're like, we're going to experience life together. We're going to see what community is like and what small group life is like, and we're going to fall in love with it. And then at the end of like 6 months, we're going to multiply this group into 4 groups, and the people who are in this group are going to become the leaders of those first 4 groups. And so everyone agreed, we came together, and it worked, right? We fell in love with community. We fell in love with being together. We fell in love with shared life, and it was amazing, and we were growing together. And then at the end of the 6 months or whatever it was, 9 months, it was time to split that group into 4 groups. And as I looked around at the people in that group, I saw this hesitancy. But we like what we have here. This has been so amazing and so beautiful. You're going to make us split up and do what? We have to lead our own groups with new people, but we're so comfortable here. And as I saw this, I just jumped into mission mode. This is for the mission of God. This is for the kingdom of God. We're doing the right thing. Let's go. There are other people out there who need to experience this. And all that was true. I mean, it was the right thing to do, and it was for the kingdom of God, it was for the mission. There were other people. If you're in a small group today and you love it, it's because those folks were able and willing to do that. But what I missed was an opportunity to say, you know what? Although we are moving forward and this has been successful, we're losing something here. We're losing the sense of togetherness. And what I should have done was said, all right, let's just kind of process what we're feeling. Let's process the loss here. What are we letting go of? Let's enter into it. Let's feel that pain. Let's celebrate. Let's lament. But I didn't do that. I missed an opportunity to expand our souls, and as a result, I think there are still people who are scarred as a result of that experience. But because of my experience with Peter Scazzero's work on emotional health, over the last 5 or 10 years, I've been training myself to pay attention for loss when it comes along and entering into it and processing it. And that served me so well over the last 5 or 10 years because I've experienced loss. And I've been able to process it much better. When in 2010, our two churches, Franktown and Parker, our one church became two churches, and we multiplied the churches. We all experienced loss. I experienced loss, and so we kind of grieved through that process all together. That same year, I tragically lost both of my grandparents very suddenly, and I was able to kind of enter into that and process that. As I've recently gone with Kim through the empty nest phase and watching our kids kind of move out of the house and moving into a new phase of life. While there's lots good there's lots that's being lost. In all these situations, things are being lost. And it's just paying attention to that and entering into it and processing it. And as a result, I feel that God has been expanding my soul. How are you with this idea of grieving loss? Let me give you a quick self-assessment quiz, all right? How about that? And we all can take this. You don't have to answer out loud or tell the person next to you, but just internally, maybe answer these few questions. On a scale of not a chance to you bet, how would you put yourself? I openly admit my losses, failures, and disappointments. Is that not a chance? No way. Or yeah, or somewhere in between. When I experience loss, I reflect on how I'm feeling rather than just move on or pretend nothing's wrong. Is that not a chance or you bet? Something in between. How about people who are in pain or grief tend to seek me out because of my ability to demonstrate compassion and empathy? If that's the case, it's probably because you've been processing your own loss well. Is that not a chance or you bet? Or this last one. I am able to cry and experience sadness, explore the reasons behind it, and allow God to work in me through it. Not a chance or you bet. Jesus said, "Blessed are they who mourn." I think he said that for a reason. Second of the Beatitudes, blessed are they who mourn. That there is a silver lining to mourning. We will be comforted. Our souls will be expanded. And Jesus didn't only say it, he lived it. He demonstrated it. And so today I want to take us to a passage of Scripture where we see Jesus demonstrating what it looks like to process loss and grief. The passage is Matthew chapter 26. This is a rich, rich passage. You've maybe heard the story before, but I want to invite you as we read this to just really engage the story, activate your imagination, put yourself in the story, see Jesus, hear Jesus, see the disciples, hear what they're saying, listen to the sobbing, just really experience the story as if you're there as Jesus wrestles with his own loss and grief. I'll read through it and then we'll come back and unpack it. It's Matthew chapter 26, verse 36, the story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the night before Jesus is crucified. Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, "Sit here while I go over there and pray." He took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, James and John, along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, that's Peter, James, and John, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour?" he asked Peter. "Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." He went away a second time and prayed, "My Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. Then he came back. He again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. Let's kind of go back again and just kind of unpack some of this passage and really kind of get a sense of what Jesus was going through. In verse 37, it says that he began to be sorrowful and troubled. As you compare that to other of the Gospels as they tell the story and also get into the Greek, it really means a sense of deep anguish and intense sadness. This isn't like sad because, my dreams didn't come true or whatever. This is a deep sense of intense grief because Jesus is experiencing loss in this moment. He understands that he's losing something. You're like, well, what is Jesus losing? He's losing all kinds of things. First of all, think about what he's going through, that all of the sin of the world in this moment are being laid onto the shoulders of the Holy Son of God, who has forever, all eternity, been in community and communion with the Father. And because all that sin and all that shame and all that guilt is being laid on him, the Father is beginning to remove himself from Christ because the holiness of God and sin can't inhabit the same space. And so Jesus is feeling this intense loss of the presence of his Father for the very first time in all of eternity. What loss? More than that, his very best friends who he's crying out to support him and pray with him and encourage him and help him, they're apathetic at best. They're right over there sleeping while he's begging for them to pray with him. One of his very best friends, Judas, who has been his good friend for 3.5 years, at that very moment is betraying him, leading a band of enemies to Jesus to come and arrest him. The nation of Israel, God's chosen people, are turning their back on him. The world that he has come to save is getting ready to crucify him for the sins of the world. Jesus is experiencing such intense loss, and he's aware of that loss, and as a result, he is intensely sorrowful and in deep anguish. Verse 38 he says to the three disciples, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. I Googled pictures of the Garden of Gethsemane this week. Maybe you've seen them. There's so many pictures of Jesus just serenely kneeling in the garden. The light is shining on his face. He looks so peaceful as he's praying. That's not what's happening. He says that I am about to die. My sorrow is so intense. My sense of loss is so great. I have reached my human limits. I cannot go on. I am going to die. I imagine the Son of God is so overwhelmed with grief that he has already lost the Passover dinner. He has been vomiting and he is, we're told, bleeding sweating blood. Thank you very much. It's so intense what he is going through. He is overwhelmed to the point of death. Verse 39 says that he falls with his face to the ground and he prayed. That his body posture demonstrates what's happening inside of him. He makes himself one with the ground. He's digging his fingers into the dirt and he is praying. That's one of the silver linings of reaching our limits and coming face to face with loss, is it moves us to pray. When you hit your limits and you realize, I can do no more, you go to the one who can do more. And that's what Jesus is doing. Some people who never would pray instinctively go to pray when we realize everything's out of my control, I'm at my limits, I can't go any further. And Jesus prays. And what does he pray? He prays, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Do you hear what Jesus is saying here? He's crying out to his Father, saying, let's do this some other way. I don't know if I can go through this. He's looking at what's about to happen. He's losing his connection to his Father. He's feeling this sense of separation for the first time in eternity. He's looking forward to the cross, what he's going to go through physically, but more than that, what he's going to be going through spiritually, as all the sin and all the shame of every sin and every sinner ever who lived, or every sin that's been committed, is going to be loaded on him, and that the full cup of God's wrath is going to be poured out on him. He is going to suffer our punishment. And as he looks forward to that, he's like, I don't think I can do this. I am at my limits. Just imagine Jesus crying loudly, sobbing, tears dripping from his face, sweat from his brow, blood from his brow. And he's saying, Father, I don't want to do this. My human will is against it. I don't think I can take it, but not what I will, but what you will. Is this a vision that you think of when you think of Jesus, as Isaiah called him, the man of sorrows? Jesus praying, if it's Father, God, let this pass. If it's possible, let's save the world some other way. And what Jesus isn't giving us here is a prosperity, health, and wealth gospel. If you want that from Jesus, you're not going to get it. So popular today. If you just have enough faith, if you just pray hard enough, all of your problems will be taken away. God will deliver you from them. Jesus doesn't get his miracle. As much as he prays, as close as he is to the Father, as much faith as he has. It's as if he says, God, please, let's do this some other way. And his Father looks at him and says, Son, I'm sorry, but there's no other way. You're not getting your miracle. You're not getting rescued. What can we learn about grieving, about embracing loss from Jesus? I think one of the clearest and most appropriate takeaways is that not only is loss a part of life, but grief, expressing sadness, even deep anguish, is a part of life when we experience loss. Jesus shows us that sadness, distress, anger, even depression are not weakness in the kingdom of God, but appropriate responses to the losses that we experience in life. And so that means, I think, if we want to be good at embracing loss and grieving so that our souls can enlarge, the first thing we need to do is, there's a picture of Christ. It's an alternate picture of Gethsemane. But we need to learn to listen for our losses. Some losses come into our lives, we don't really need to pay attention. They're just, boom, they're there, they knock us over, they take the wind out of us, and we don't need to pay attention to them. That's what's happening for Jesus right now. Jesus didn't have to be like, well, I wonder what I'm losing here. You didn't have to take an inventory. It was just, bam, it knocked him on the ground. It was like taking the life out of him. And that comes in our lives sometimes when we lose a child, when we lose a spouse, when we go through divorce or rape or sexual abuse, or when someone close to us commits suicide, or when we have an accident that leads to a disability, or when we're faced with cancer or infertility. I mean, when things like these happen, we know we've lost something. We don't have to pay attention to anything. It just comes along and we just have grief. And in those moments, maybe we feel like when those things happen, we have permission to grieve. That the world gives us permission to grieve, even if for a short time. But we may not feel really comfortable knowing how to grieve, even in those times. I've talked to people saying, I'm bad at this, or we beat ourselves up, or I should be over this by now, or I should feel worse, or whatever, and we beat ourselves up. We don't really know how to grieve. But there are other losses that come into our lives that are much more subtle. Things that come into our lives just in day-to-day life, losses that we experience that we really need to pay attention to if we want to have our souls enlarged. You have a change in job. And even though it's a promotion, you're moving to a new city. That's going to mean a loss of the familiar and loss of friends and things that you love. Or when your body begins to age and you start to notice those little things that are happening in your body. That's a loss. We need to pay attention to those things when they happen. When our children leave home. When a friend moves away. That's a loss. When you put all you have into a business, it doesn't work out. That's a loss. When you even set a goal, you don't meet that goal. That's losing something. You lose a pet. You have a miscarriage. Someone that you look up to, a role model, you find out that they're corrupt. All of these things bring loss into our lives. And they're not the exception. Right? These are the norm. And when we lose something, we feel something. And when we feel something, we need to pay attention to that and enter into it. Process it, express it. And this is where we're really not good. Instead of processing pain, what we typically do is we spin, we cover up, and we spiritualize. We spin it. When something bad comes along, or we lose, or we fail, we just focus on the positive parts of that, and we just ignore all the negative parts. Yeah, I lost my job, but I didn't like it anyway, or I didn't like my boss. It's all good. Or yeah, we found out we're infertile, but you know what? Now we're free. We don't have to worry about kids. That's spinning. Or we cover up. We fail. We lose something. We figure if I just don't think about it, if I just don't talk about it, maybe no one will notice. Or maybe I won't even notice. Maybe I can just cover it up. Maybe I don't have to worry about it. Or Christians are really great at spiritualizing. Yeah, that didn't work out, but you know what? God's got a better plan, and He's working all things together for good, and I know that, I really had my hopes set on that. That was a really traumatic loss, but I'm going to see in the end that this all worked out great. And that may be true. And God may be working all things together for good, and it may work out better than before, but that doesn't discount the fact that, you know what? I need to enter into the fact that I lost something, and I need to feel something because I lost something, because that's what Jesus shows us what it looks like. So when we spin, when we cover up, when we spiritualize our losses, we miss out. We don't expand our souls. We actually shrink our souls. See, we realize that we're lying to ourselves when we tell ourselves all these lies or we cover up. And we know that things aren't really that good. Deep down we know we're lying in the midst of pain. When we tell ourselves and others, you know what, just smile, just keep going. What if Jesus would have responded this way to pain and to sorrow? What if Jesus, in the Garden of Gethsemane, would have, instead of writhing on the ground and crying, what if he would have just gathered his disciples together and said, you know what, guys, it's going to get tough, but buck up. I'm strong, you can be strong. Let's just all put a smile on. We can get through this together, all right? I don't want to see any tears, Or what if Jesus at the tomb of Lazarus, his good friend, where we're told that he wept? What if he would have instead told all the mourners, stop crying, smile, it's all going to work out great. I'm going to raise him from the dead. It's going to be great. As a matter of fact, I'm going to raise all believers in me from the dead eventually, so never cry at a funeral again. As a matter of fact, just laugh and celebrate life at funerals. Don't even worry about grieving. Or if Jesus is hanging on the cross, feeling the intense separation from his Father, rather than crying, my God, why have you forsaken me? What if hanging on the cross, he just would have smiled and said, God's going to get the victory. It's all going to be good. I'm going to be in heaven in 3 days. It's awesome. All those would have been true, but they're not authentic. It's not learning to process loss as a human who experiences loss all the time. This isn't what Jesus showed us, and this isn't how we are to act as well. But how ironic that in the name of this suffering God, we create communities in his name where grieving is seen as weakness. Our questions are seen as lack of faith. And crying out to God is seen as inappropriate. May it never be. Because Jesus is the one, fingers in the dirt, sweating blood, crying out to God, questioning God, praying for help from his friends. This is the example he gives us, and this is the example we are to follow. It shows us that good Christians, strong Christians, grieve. Good Christians, strong Christians experience loss and sadness and can question God and not understand things. This is what it looks like to follow him. That's why this church is a safe place to be on a spiritual journey. And it's a safe place to be real. That's why our value of authentic community puts it like this. We create safe places where people can connect, where struggles and victories can be shared openly, and where there is no fear of being judged. So the first thing we need to do is we need to learn to begin listening for the losses in our lives. Some are going to be really easy. Some we need to pay a little bit more attention to. And the second way to really process loss well is that we then need to take an inventory of what it is we've actually lost. Before I can really process pain, I need to know what it is I'm losing. And again, there are some losses that come into our lives that's so easy. It just comes so naturally. If I lose a spouse, I'm going to spend a lot of time thinking about what I have lost. The time together, the dream of growing old together, the dream of enjoying grandchildren together, the 50th anniversary trip that we wanted to take that we'll never get to take. As painful as it is, we need to enter into that pain and take an inventory of what exactly did I lose in this loss? What will I never get to experience as a result of this loss? And we go into that and we process it, and our souls begin to breathe. But there are some losses, again, especially losses in the midst of success, that we have a much harder time slowing down and thinking about, well, what did I actually lose here? Like the promotion, where I moved to the new town. It's so easy to just think, wow, I'm moving to a new town, it's all going to be great, and we just cover up what we're letting go of, the familiar and the friends, and the home with the memories, and maybe the church family that I love, or the city I love to live in, that we process that. You know, I have had for the last couple of years a goal to run in the Boston Marathon. And so this is a goal of mine. And so this year, because I've run in several marathons before, but this year I've said, all right, this is the race in June. I'm going to try to qualify for the Boston Marathon. Because qualifying for the Boston is very difficult to do, and it takes a lot of time, because you got to not only run a lot of miles, but you have to run them really fast, and that's really painful. So I'm like, all right, this is my race. If I can get into the Boston on this race, I'm in. If not, I'm done, right? But I had this goal, and I had this dream, right? I want to do it. But it didn't happen. And so I got to the end of that. I realized, okay, I have a loss here. I need to enter into this. I need to grieve. It's not like losing a spouse, but it's still loss. And so I went in. I'm like, what am I actually losing? Well, I'm losing the opportunity to run in this historic race. I'm losing an opportunity to make memories with a good friend. And I'm losing an opportunity to buy that cool Boston Marathon jacket that I really have my heart set on. We've got to learn to grieve the losses in our lives. Take an inventory of what has been lost. What exactly are you losing? You get the point. This leads to the third takeaway, which is this. We need to be willing to wait in the in-between, the confusing in-between. And this is the hard part, right? I hate waiting. You hate waiting. I hate waiting in lines. I hate waiting for planes. I hate waiting for people. I've been waiting for my tax refund for over 4 months. I'm sick of waiting for it, right? We hate waiting. We hate waiting on God. We don't like waiting on God. We would much rather control things. We would much rather experience instant gratification. We would much rather have instant answers to our questions and our doubts and our confusion. We don't want to wait. But that's not the way God works, especially in the midst of grief, especially deep grief. You know, we pray, God, take this pain away now. And he really does, right? He just lets it continue to process, and we need to wait in the confusing in between. Or God, I want an answer now to know why this happened the way it did. It's usually silence. So we have to wait in the confusing in between. We can't rush through grief. Listen, pain needs to be slowly digested into our souls if it's going to do the work it needs to do. I don't know why, but pain needs to be slowly digested into our souls if it's going to do the work that it needs to do. So stay as long as you need. Wait on God. Listen to your emotions and continually kind of surrender them to Him. God, I'm confused. God, I don't understand. God, I hurt. Just keep surrendering those to God in the confusing in between. Stay in the pain of grief as long as you need to. You know, we all process grief differently in different time frames, different ways. We need to listen to our emotions as long as our emotions are speaking. And then finally, we need to let the old birth the new. This is the central message of Christianity. This is the message of the gospel. That God takes the broken and makes it whole. That God takes the sad. He brings comfort. That He brings healing. Jesus went through the Garden of Gethsemane and He went through the cross. But on the other side of that was resurrection. Right? He couldn't get to the resurrection if He didn't go through the garden and go through the cross. He had to go through the pain to get to the resurrection. And the same is true with us. If we want the enlarged soul, we need to be willing to go through the loss and process it well. But we need to know that on the other side is resurrection, right? When we get to the very end of our lives and we give up our lives and we lose everything in death, we need to know that on the other side is resurrection. And the same is true with every one of the losses that we experience in life, that as we process grief well, that in the end it's going to bring new birth, and it's going to bring new life, and it's going to enlarge our soul. Let me just share with you briefly a couple of things, a few advantages of learning to process grief well and what the enlarged soul looks like. Maybe you've experienced this, maybe you know some people like this. But as we do this well, we learn, we become more compassionate. Right? Because we've been there. We have been in the valley of despair. We know how that feels, and we're able to empathize well. We have a greater perspective on what's important. Nothing strips away the trivial things we think are so important, like being in the valley of despair and experiencing grief. You're all of a sudden like, woof, that doesn't matter. So that's why we're free from having to impress others. I used to think it was important to impress you. Not anymore, because I've been stripped of all that triviality through the valley of despair. We're able to live with unanswered questions with much more comfort once we have been through grief, because we have seen, we could survive that, and sometimes we're not going to have the answers. That we have a new sense of humility and vulnerability, again, because so much has been stripped away, that I'm able to say, hey, here's who I am, here's what I've been through. That we could place God at the center of our lives. This can go either way, right? We can go through grief and just completely shut God out. But if our faith is intact at the other end, God all of a sudden takes this new central place in our life, because, again, we realize He's the only one that could walk through us through that valley, and He's the only one who has the answer. He's the only one who could really comfort us. We have less fear, more willingness to take risks because of what we've been through and what we've processed. We're less judgmental of other people because we start to see that so much is out of our control. And we can understand that other people have stuff out of their control as well. And how about this? We learn to hunger for heaven as we process loss. Listen, I am still learning this whole grieving thing. I'm getting really good at grieving the little things, like not making the Boston Marathon and saying goodbye to my son Luke yesterday. And in Portland, I realized there was some sadness there. I entered into it. But I'm just experimenting with this. I'm really growing. But I know that this is so vitally important, because some of the most beautiful people I know, some of the most beautiful souls I have met, are people who have gone through such intense loss that I would never want to experience, but they've come out on the other side of it with their faith intact. And so I thought it would be good just to end this time together by meeting one of those people. And so I've asked my friend Irene to kind of come on up. Irene is one of those souls. I told her, anyone who knows her, all she has to do is come up here and stand here, and she'll make her point. But come on up, Irene. She's going to stand. Thank you.
Can you help me out?
I will.
Me? I'm old.
So, Irene, anybody who knows you knows what a beautiful, gracious, non-judgmental, compassionate, empathetic person you are. You're welcome. But what a lot of people won't know about you, what a lot of people don't know your story and the incredible amount of loss you have experienced in your life, more than any person ever deserves. So just talk to us about some of the loss you've experienced in your life.
Yeah. My husband and I, we had 4 children, 1 son and 3 daughters. About 47 years ago, my oldest daughter and her two little ones, little Dean and Shauna, were killed in a horrible automobile accident. This big old 18-wheeler swerved to avoid a person driving the wrong way on the freeway. And when he swerved, his vehicle turned sideways, landed right on the top of her car, killed him instantly. It was a horror story. It hurts even to think about it today. Such a loss so quickly. Mm-hmm. And then a couple of years later, my second daughter, Joanie, got cancer. And she had cervical cancer. And it spread to her brain. And they tried everything, to chemotherapy, radiation, all of that. Finally, she was so bad, I had to take her. She was divorced, so we took her in, and I cared for her and cared for the 2 boys. I remember getting up in the morning and going into her room and getting down by the side of the bed and taking her in my arms and praying, God, please heal Joanie. Every day, day after day after day, God, please heal Joanie. God didn't heal her. She got so bad we had to call an ambulance, and she was taken to the hospital, and she died 2 weeks later.
And she was 28.
She was 28.
Yeah.
And had two little boys left. One was 7 and one was 5.
Yeah. Now, I know you've had much other loss other than that, your husband, your father, obviously, others.
Yeah.
But walk through kind of the grief. I know that Joanie is a story that really stands out to you. Walk through your grief of what you experienced in losing her.
I was mad.
Mm-hmm.
I was angry at God. Mm-hmm. I was so angry at God because we had prayed and prayed and prayed, and I had lost another daughter and my two grandkids, and so.
You were telling me a story about what happened in church about a month after Joanie died?
Yeah. About 2 weeks after Joanie died, we had a traveling evangelist come through. And he decided on Sabbath he spoke about grief and loss and answered prayer. That's what he was mainly stressing.
Yeah, answered prayer. Mm-hmm.
And he told the story of how he lost the keys to his car. And he needed to get to a meeting really quickly. He couldn't find his darn keys. So he prayed and asked God to please help him find his keys. God helped him right away. He found his keys. He had inadvertently thrown in the wastebasket along with some papers that he threw in. There were his keys.
What did that do for you?
I hated it. I got up and walked out of church.
Why is that?
Because he answered his prayer, not mine.
A silly prayer like finding keys.
Yeah.
And here's Joanie.
Dumb little prayer, That's the way I looked at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked out and I went home, and I was so mad. I had to go out and sit in the car and wait till my husband came out. Of course, it's a guy thing, like you said.
He wouldn't leave early with you?
No. Well, he left a little bit early.
Did he?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. But that took you on a journey for several months where you wouldn't talk to God, you wouldn't open your Bible.
I went home, and the first thing I did when I got home, I threw my Bible in the trash. That's how mad I was. Well, I went back 2 days later and found it and stuck it in a drawer somewhere. But for several months, I don't remember exactly how long, you wouldn't catch me in church. Mm-hmm. To my husband's credit, he didn't hassle me. He didn't preach me. He just went to church with the kids. Yeah. He handled it like you would handle it. But
Thanks for giving me the benefit of the doubt. Appreciate that.
Watch it, kid.
You said that several months into this, you actually picked up the Bible, and it was actually this story that really you turned to. Tell us about that.
That was, my husband was at church, and I was feeling pretty lonely and lost. And so I said...
So you're missing God. You were kind of missing God a little bit.
I think I really was. I didn't want to admit it, because I hated God, I hated it. But anyway, and so I picked up my Bible, and what do you know? I opened to Matthew 26, which you were just referring to, where Christ asked God to spare him the cup. God didn't spare him. God did not answer his prayer the way he wanted it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, on the cross, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah.
And I'm reading this, and I'm thinking, God didn't answer his prayer. He could have brought down, fire from heaven and destroyed everybody and rescued Jesus, but he didn't do it. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I thought, I sat there and I thought, what if God answered every single one of our prayers the way we want him answered? Mm-hmm. Everybody on earth? What's he going to do with the couple where she's praying, God, please help my boyfriend to propose to me, and he's saying, please, God, can you help me figure out a way to get out of this relationship? What's God going to do?
That's a tough one. So you went through
I began to think that, began to think like that. Yeah.
So you went through this period of grief, but that, it doesn't leave you the same, going through what you've gone through and coming out on the other side, having your faith. You got very involved in ministry to women in prison.
Yes.
And
yeah.
over 40 years, you have been touching so many lives of broken women in prison
Yeah.
at a place that's so vulnerable. But you told me the story about a time when what you went through in your grief was really kind of came through in a woman's life. What was that story?
We were sitting in about 17 women in a group. We were in the rec room, so anybody could stop by and sit down. This young woman came in and sat down in the group, and she announced immediately, "I hate God."
I hate God, okay.
And I said, "Honey, why? Explain why." And she talked about how her father molested her when she was 6 and 7 years older. And she would go down in the basement into a closet and pray and ask God, "Please help my dad to forget about me tonight when he comes home from work." Never worked.
Mm-hmm.
She never worked. And she ended up doing time. But she hated God. And then she didn't give us a chance to talk to her. She just got up and she said, "Deal with it," and walked out.
Yeah. But you said that there were others in the group that kind of judged her for that. But what happened in your heart toward that woman?
I felt so sorry for her. I wanted to take her in my arms and hold her.
Because you had been there yourself.
Yeah. You're not
you had
kidding.
experienced that very emotion.
I felt angry at God, too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. I never saw her again. But I was able to talk to the other women in the group, and we were able to kind of work through some of their disappointments and some of their slip-ups and how they felt about God.
Yeah.
But it's so important, I think, that we not preach to people who are rebelling against God.
Uh-huh.
That we not tell them, "What's the matter with you? Just have faith." And that's just what you were talking about.
Yeah.
You've got to take them and say, "Talk to me.
Yeah.
Tell me what's going on."
Well, Irene, I would ask you to kind of share kind of how you're different as a result of your grief and how you're a beautiful person now. But I know you're so humble. You'd never do that, so let me say. I think anyone who knows you knows just what a gracious, patient, non-judgmental, loving person that you are, that you just kind of make whoever's around you feel loved and appreciated. And I can't help but think that a part of that is because of what you've been through and what you've processed and how your soul has been expanded as a result of the loss that you've been through.
Yeah, and at my age, and some of you who are my age, you'll understand, anger and hatred is so tiring.
Mm-hmm.
It's just much more comfortable to be understanding and not judgmental.
It's easy. It's easier.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah.
Irene, would you just pray a blessing on us,
on
our church?
I'd love to.
Thank you.
Father, thank you so much for being here with us this morning. We can feel your presence. We know you love us. And we know that you're going to go with us as we leave here today. We love you and we love each other. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.